So on this episode of Foster Denovo Talks, we interview Jamie Smith, who's one of our senior partners here at Foster Denovo. Jamie talks about life before financial advice.
I actually had my heart set on joining the military when I basically injured my knee pretty badly.
And really talks to us about the difference between being an employed and self-employed advisor, of which he's been both.
When I think about 10 or 20 years ago, being self-employed was the sort of pinnacle of being a financial advisor. And actually, almost in a way, an employed advisor was a bit subpar. These days, I think what businesses like Foster Denovo actually want is, they want you to build those deep client relationships. And I think businesses are more interested. They realise that the way to keeping and retaining clients is to keep and retain their good advisors.
So do have a listen. Hi, Jamie. Thank you for joining us on Foster Denovo Talks.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, very welcome. So before we launch into talking about your career and financial advice and all that side of things, tell me about, what you were doing before that. I know you've mentioned you didn't have a career, but what were you doing before financial advice?
Well, I was at university, and it never sort of occurred to me that being a financial advisor would be a good path for me.
Wasn't job number one for you?
It's
on
not
that
something I
fair?
sort of sat deeply about. In fact, it's not something I knew anything about at all. And I actually had my heart set on joining the military, and I was going through my Sandhurst or officer selection process at the time. I was probably about 2/3 of the way through that process. When I basically injured my knee pretty badly. I was at university, being invited to play for my halls of residence football team. Wasn't a footballer in any way, shape or form, rugby player. And obviously, where do you stick the guy that knows nothing about football? You just put him in goal, right?
Right at the back.
So,
right at the back, yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, a very large opponent accidentally fell on my leg and just completely wrecked my knee, cruciates, ligaments, that kind of thing. And that kind of put paid to any military career, really. It was something I wasn't going to come back on. My knee wasn't very, and to this day isn't very stable at all. So I needed to look at other options. And I took a bit of time, left university, and it wasn't until a family friend who was a founding partner in a big wealth management company at the time, somebody who I really admired, really looked up to, and who was incredibly passionate about what he did as well. So that was kind of infectious. So said to me, I think this will be a good career for you. I think, you'd make a good financial advisor. It kind of suits your personality, it suits your sort of technical and analytical mind as well. You're sort of good with people. And he suggested to me that I should go and get a couple of exams, which at the time was the FPC exams.
Now you're showing your age.
Yeah, exactly. So this was early 20s, and I went out and got those. Sort of did some home study, and he told me that this is where you want to apply for, and it was a high street bank, and he had kind of handpicked it because at the time they were quite unusual in the sense that they weren't charging their customers initial fees. And he just felt, that was for a young, inexperienced advisor, a good place to cut your teeth because, it'd be easier to talk to people if there was no large initial fee in place. And as I say, the rest is history.
The rest is history. So you were at this firm. So how did that go? How long were you there? What were you doing?
So this was a high street bank. So I was there for a few years, and it was just a place to, sort of put into action what I'd learned over those first few weeks, really sort of get a taste of what it's like to be a financial advisor. And let's face it, 20 years ago, high street bank financial advice was more about meeting people with surplus cash savings. They'd be referred literally from the teller or from the cashier.
It was the branch sort of financial planning
exactly
manager.
that. You remember those days?
Yeah.
And they'd be wheeled into the room where you're sat in front of a desk to have a meeting about financial advice and the benefits of saving longer term and investing longer term and all of that. So that was great for me, because up to that point, I hadn't really been in a client facing or customer facing role. So although I felt in at the deep end, it was really helped me to learn how to speak to people and how to sort of engage with them, really. So, it was a great learning experience.
It's where you cut your teeth, basically, yeah.
That's right.
And so you were there for how many years, you say?
I was there for 3 years.
Okay. And then where did you move on to?
So after that, I moved on to a private bank. Actually, a friend of mine was a headhunter.
Right.
And it's a bit bizarre because I wasn't really looking to move or anything, but he kind of suggested that, I sort of consider this role. And at the time, it's big, again, another big UK national bank. And I didn't really realize the opportunity, but they were doing a sort of a graduate intake. Again, how many businesses do that these days? Working in their private bank division. And basically the private bank division is, you're dealing with people who have a lot of money. I think the threshold at that point for them was £5 million, which again, 15, 20 odd years ago was quite a high threshold. But my role wasn't quite client facing in the sense that I wasn't kind of leading the relationships, very much, in the background and working under what they referred to as private bankers at the time, which just, in itself just made it sound so cool and glamorous. And it was another role that I felt just gave me such amazing experience and grounding. And the guy that I worked for, he was a difficult guy to work for, but I was slightly in awe of him, really, in a few different ways.
Okay. And so you worked with this guy, and you were sort of sitting behind the scenes, you said. So he was doing more of the client facing, I imagine, and you were sort of around with him?
It was a bit more of a sort of an administration type of role. We were on an advisory desk.
I see.
Whereby you're sort of presenting investment ideas to high net worth individuals and to trusts and charities and that kind of thing. And then my role was not so much presenting those ideas to clients, but kind of taking their instruction and putting them into practice. Pretty similar to, I guess, some of the administration and support teams that we have here at Foster Denovo. But, you were still having to chat to clients, trying to build a relationship with them. And, these are a different type of person, right? Compared to your high street bank financial advice customer.
They couldn't be more worlds apart,
exactly, yeah. So again, I felt that sort of experience has really helped me as well.
Okay. And then where did you go from there?
So from there, I worked for another large US bank, Citigroup, and that was back to customer facing, and then I did that for 3 years, and then I was at a point in my personal life whereby I wanted to the pensions freedoms were being introduced. This was back in 2015, and I thought that was a really good opportunity to get involved in the corporate financial advice side. It sort of always appealed to me. I felt that because I'd worked for bigger PLC type businesses, I'd always felt quite comfortable with that sort of corporate environment. And I thought that I would get on quite well dealing directly with businesses. And at the time, there was an opportunity for employers and big companies to kind of look at their pension schemes that they offer to the workforce and how to incorporate and offer the new freedoms and flexi access drawdown within their pensions. And a lot of people thought that was going to be, a massive opportunity. So I worked for Hargreaves Lansdown as part of their retirement service. It's very much annuity focused before that. But it transpired that lots of occupational pension schemes for a start, they didn't really want to offer drawdown within the scheme. There were all sorts of risks involved, and the opportunity wasn't quite what we all thought it was going to be. So that's when I moved back to the personal advice side. But at this point, my family friend said to me, look, I think now is a good time for you to come and join us here at St James's Place. And I did that for 4 years.
So thankfully, you're with Foster Denovo. So what was the drive, or what brought you over to us to become an advisor?
Well, I lots of different reasons. At St James's Place, I was a self-employed financial advisor, and whilst that has lots of benefits, it also obviously has its challenges as well. I had a young daughter in private school. We wanted to sort of move house, and there was lots of other sort of factors going on. And I just felt that it was the right time to kind of move into an employed role that would give me some financial stability. And that's why I made the move. And actually, it sort of only occurred to me this morning that I've worked for Foster Denovo for almost half of my career. Yeah, so having been at all those sort of bigger companies, actually where I was more comfortable was actually in a smaller business that was a bit more nimble, that I felt that, I was hurt. There were more opportunities and scope for growing individually.
Yeah, and you have, massively grown since you've been here, haven't you? So, not calling you fat,
Yes.
but no, you have. So, you've been very much on the employed advisor side. You're a senior partner now, but you've been a really big part of our succession planning for practice buyouts that we do and businesses that we acquire. Talk us through that side of what you've been doing.
Yeah, so I feel quite lucky actually to be a part of this journey, and actually it started about 9 years ago when I joined. I think I'm right in saying that I was the first employed financial advisor at Foster Denovo. There was another colleague who was already part of Foster Denovo, but I was the first one recruited externally. So there was only two of us.
Would it help if I said yes? Would that make you feel good? Make you feel better?
Look,
I'd like to take that
in
mantle.
20 years' time, we might look back and they may say, he was a trailblazer. But no, I feel quite lucky to be part of that. And I think, that was when we look at the strategy for the business, that was obviously always part of it, to kind of incorporate more and more employed financial advisors. And as part of that journey, not only was I kind of tasked with building up my own portfolio of clients, I kind of just, I hate using that phrase, or that term, but I don't know how else to describe them.
I mean, it's a book of clients. It's a bank. All of it doesn't sound great, does it? So it's just they're your clients, aren't they? So
group of clients.
Yeah.
But actually, that kind of changed a few years ago when I was asked to work with a partner whose practice Foster Denovo had recently bought, and kind of transition the clients that he had worked with for several decades, in fact, and take them on as my own clients. And I've done that now. I'm just going through the third go of that.
So you've had 3 sets of client banks or portfolios, as however we're going to call them. What's been different between the 3? Because all advisors are different. They work differently. Their clients, they're always incredibly client-centric, and that's something that we know. But how's it been different managing those different things?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. There's definitely been big differences between the way that all of those 3 individual advisors worked with their clients, and almost I've kind of had the perfect mix, if you like. I've had the opposite ends of the spectrum, and then the one that we're currently working with is the nice sort of balance in the middle. So the first partner, and I have to say, all of them obviously deeply respect, and I think it's more important to talk about the values that they all shared, because there are lots of commonalities between all of them. but the differences are in the way that they worked and the way that they serviced their clients. So, the first partner that I worked with, and this was a bit of an eye opener to me because this can be a lonely job, right?
Yeah.
You kind of work independently. You might occasionally speak to colleagues and you share practices, you share tips, you talk about challenges and all that kind of thing. But you actually don't really get to see people do it, in the wild, in the real world. So this was the first opportunity I'd had to see another financial advisor actually engaging and talking to his clients. And I just thought he was amazing, right? I've learned so much of all three. That's why I feel really honoured and privileged. But the first guy, and this worked for his clients, right? So it's definitely not a criticism, but he spent a lot of time with his clients. So a review meeting would typically take 5 hours. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
5 hours, give or take an hour,
give or take 10 minutes,
and you sort of be sat there with him, and he'd sort of have the clients in front of him, sat there, and then one of them would get up and sort of, put the washing on or unload the dishwasher. It's sort of a hint. But he'd still keep going, but he was he really, and when we talk about the commonalities between all those three advisors, he really cared about those clients. So and that's there's lots of commonalities between the three of them.
Yeah, and it's been great. You've done a great job with all of them. And that's what we hope to keep doing, right? This is what we like to do. We like to, bring on.
You said that on the record now, so
yeah,
you can't
no,
take that back.
absolutely, I know, and I'm very happy with that. But we like to bring on retiring businesses of our partners, and then transition them through, and have people that know Foster Denovo and have been with us, so that they know our values and all the rest of it, and can see it through the clients. We've talked about this before, but you mentioned obviously you were self-employed, and now you're employed. Difference, because we've talked and you said, maybe I'd like to go back to being self-employed at one day. So how do you feel about the difference between those two things, and what would you say to people?
Well, I think I'd be very careful about what I say on record. I don't want to say anything that doesn't sort of age particularly well when it comes to my own personal career. But I think it's changed. It's evolved a lot, right? I think when I think about 10 or 20 years ago, being self-employed was the sort of pinnacle of being a financial advisor, right? For lots of different reasons. You've got more control and you're building something for yourself. You've got a capital value. And the scope to earn more. I mean, those are just a few, but there's lots of it. And actually, almost in a way, an employed advisor was a bit subpar. Perhaps there was regarded as people who weren't as motivated, who weren't as good, they weren't as qualified, and lots of different reasons. But I think that has really changed only relatively recently, probably in the last 5 years or so. And I don't know what the numbers are, but there seems to be a sort of shift from older advisors who have typically been self-employed and who are now retiring to employed advisors. And I'm trying to sort of think about, what's the reason for that? Why has that changed? Why has that evolved? And I think it comes down to when you think about what financial advice used to be. We mentioned about it used to be very much about sort of product selling, but these days, financial advice is really about relationships and building trust with people and working with clients, hopefully for decades, as some of these other advisors that I worked with have done. And I think there was always this kind of notion that if you were employed, you couldn't have that. It was almost like a transient type of role. Clients would come and go, you'd move on to the next place, you'd lose your relationships and so on and so forth. But, these days, I think what businesses like Foster Denovo actually want is, they want you to build those deep client relationships. And I think businesses are more interested. They realize that the way to keeping and retaining clients is to keep and retain their good advisors.
Absolutely, continuity and longevity, 100%. With that in mind, what would you say to people that were looking to get into financial advice? Because it is a aging population at the moment. There are less younger people getting into it. So what would your advice be to people that are thinking about it, from where you came from?
It's bizarre, isn't it? Why are
It's a great
younger
job.
people, why do they not want to become financial advisors? It sort of intrigues me a little bit, because when I think about the role itself, it's so multifaceted. What other role do you have to wear so many hats in? You've got the technical aspect, the knowledge, you've got the sales side, and it's just such a varied role. Notwithstanding the most important fact of all, which is you're not saving lives, but you are making a massive difference to people, right? So what is it that young people don't like about that? But I think maybe the barriers, if you like, are perhaps they're a little bit too high. I was lucky enough to apply to a high street bank with no experience at all. I had off my own back, I just had a couple of exams under my belt, and get into their 6-week residential course. And within a matter of months, be sat in front of people giving financial advice. Is it that those days are gone? And actually, for younger people, for anyone, as a matter of fact, but particularly for younger people to be financial advisors, that it's not as easy as that anymore. It's expected that they need to get several years worth of experience doing those kind of back office, those support and administrative type roles before they get those opportunities to sit in front of clients. And, is that what is putting people off?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know whether it's people feel that if they're self-employed, they have to build their own client bank, and then that's a really tough market now, and it's all sort of very digital. And what used to be actual door knocking is now LinkedIn and digital door knocking and all that sort of stuff. I don't know whether it's people are nervous around being too young to do it and not having the skill set, and I don't know. I think it's.
If you give someone 6 weeks of residential the proper training. Right.
Yeah.
There's no reason why a younger person couldn't be a financial advisor. I'm not saying you want to wheel them out in front of your sort of ultra high net worth clients, but like you would do at a high street bank, sort of cut your teeth, speaking to people, and just having those conversations.
Yeah. No, I agree. So on a final note, looking ahead, what's the next 5 years for you? I don't know why you're laughing, Jamie. It's not a loaded question.
Because that really does sound like the killer question. That's the one that really gets me in trouble. But I think for the next 5 years, I'm really pleased to be part of the ambitious growth plans that Foster Denovo has. I'm pleased that I can play a very small part in that, in working with clients and helping retiring advisors and trying to sort of build business off the back of that. So we'll see. I think for me personally and what I do, lots of my clients that I work with, it's an incredibly important time for them. A lot of them are sort of around retirement. That in itself is quite complex. But if you overlay that with lots of the uncertainty that's going on, whether it be sort of, tax rules, legislation, financial markets, I think clients need us more than ever. So I just remain sort of focused on that for the time being.
Well, that is excellent, because what I heard is I'm staying at Foster Denovo for the next 5 years plus. But on that note, thank you so much for joining us. That's been brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.